Good evening and welcome to Zoom In on a Fresh Conversation. It is Monday night all over again. My name is Donna Banks. I am your host, and our special guest tonight is Joe DeSantis, author of 3 Points Shy, the true story of Seminole High's quest for the 1980 Florida High School State Basketball Championship. Welcome, Joe, to Zoom In on a Fresh Conversation.
Donna, thank you for having me. I'm glad to be on board and glad to talk about the book and share some time with you.
Thank you so much. Zoom In on a Fresh Conversation is brought to you by Eilish Diamonds LLC, Lee's Press, Milton McCulloch, author of Love and Emancipation, Dante Productions, who will feature Janine McAdams, Grammy Award-winning musician, at Cinematique on Sunday, August 13th at 2 p.m. And of course, the Fresh Book Festival, which will be held in the beautiful city of Daytona Beach, which is February 22, 23, 24 in the year 2024 in Daytona Beach. Please join us. We hope, we're fingers crossed, the application for the festival will open up, I believe, like the 21st of August. So keep your eye out for it. If you have any questions for Joe, please leave them in the chat room. And this conversation is being recorded. So thank you everyone for being here. Joe, thank you for coming this evening. And if you'll take a moment and give us a brief background, we'd appreciate it.
I'll give you the Nickel autobiography.
Okay, I like it.
Donna, I grew up in a military family. Both my parents met when they were in the Navy way back in the day. We bounced up and down the East Coast. I lived in probably 10 different states, a couple of foreign countries, and Alaska. We did settle in Virginia Beach, Virginia, long enough for me to graduate from high school, where I started writing there for my high school newspaper. In the introduction of the book is actually dedicated to my high school English teacher and journalism teacher, Mrs. Florence Blankenship. She recruited me out of a 10th grade English class and put me on the straight and narrow, got me interested in writing, and I've been writing ever since. Shortly after graduating from high school, I enlisted in the Army and went through their print journalism school and their broadcast journalism school. I worked for the Armed Forces Network overseas. You may recall the Robin Williams movie, Good Morning Vietnam.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I did the same thing, except I was a disc jockey in Frankfurt and a sports announcer in Frankfurt. Got out of the service, came home, landed my job at the Sanford Herald, where this book and story took place. And from there, I've been involved in either print or broadcast journalism my entire adult life. Went to grad school along the way, picked up a master's degree and started teaching communications. And currently I'm in a state of semi-retirement. I still do some adjunct communications work at Eastern Florida State College, which you may remember as the old Brevard Community College back in the day, like Daytona Beach Community College. And last year I sat down and decided to put into print a story I'd been carrying around in my heart and my head for more than 40 years.
Well, that's my first question. So when did you decide to write the book?
I've had the book as a back burner project for a long time, almost 4 decades, but life gets in the way, jobs get in the way, employment gets in the way, family responsibilities get in the way, meeting deadlines in the newspaper business gets in the way. And until the last 2 years, when things started to slow down for me professionally and I edged towards retirement, there really wasn't any time to sit down and physically do the book. But when I did, I went at it with a great degree of gusto. I started writing the manuscript on August 1st of last year and finished the book by Christmas time.
What?
I'm used to deadline pressure. I'm a
prolifically
fast writer.
That is, I don't even want to tell you about my journey. So when the next question is kind of like, when did you do that? You sat down, was it at night, at outside, in your office, at coffee shops? When did you?
You can see the background of my man cave here. Okay,
this is it.
This is where I do my writing, and the book wasn't a steady process for me. There were some days where I would sit down and I would knock out an entire chapter. There were other days when I would sit here and look at the keyboard and say, there's just no juice flowing today and nothing's coming. There were times where I would wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning and have a great idea for, here's what I want to do with this next chapter. Here's how I want to develop the characters and move the story along. And I'd get out of bed and I'd write from 4 in the morning till 10, 11 o'clock in the morning, have a late breakfast and go back and take a nap. So it wasn't a steady daily grind. When the motivation struck, I wrote a lot. When it wasn't there, I took a day or two off. But I did complete the manuscript. I gave myself a self-imposed deadline to have the book done by Christmas time, because in talking with William Lee at Lee's Publishing, he kind of gave me the scenario of the timeline from submitting manuscript to actually getting the physical book into the marketplace. And I had that deadline and that time frame in mind.
Does this book go from the beginning to the end, or the end to the beginning? What's the timeline?
It starts with a flashback to when the head coach, Bill Payne, who is one of the principal characters, first arrived on campus, how he suffered through his first 2 years with a team that wasn't very good. And then the story picks up and rolls chronologically from the beginning of the 1979 basketball season to when the season culminated in February of 1980 at the state championships in Lakeland.
So tell us, we always like to talk about people's publishing experiences, and this is your first book, right? So tell us about your publishing experience, and if there were any landmines you wish you knew before you decided to publish a book.
Good question, because despite the fact that I spent a lot of time in the newspaper and radio business,
it's
a different animal all unto itself. And I was really naive. So I started to do research, like I do research for almost any project that I work on. And I didn't want to go down the traditional route of trying to get an agent, going through a traditional publishing company, because I'd be 106 years old by the time the book ever got to the marketplace with that traditional process.
Right.
So I started looking into self-publishing companies. I probably had communication and interviews with 5 or 6 companies. I felt good about some of them, not so warm and fuzzy with the others. And one of my former students, Tensie Taylor, who was a marvelous young lady and published a great book about being bullied in high school, she had her book published by Lee's Press. So I got a hold of Tensie, and we had a long conversation on the phone, and I asked her about William Lee. I asked her about Lee Publishing, about her experience, and she gave me positive vibes and good reviews. And the more I discussed over the phone with William Lee, the project, the more our comfort level grew.
Yes.
And when the manuscript was done in December, we set up a January 5th phone call, and that's when we sealed the deal, and I decided to go there. It's an interesting process when you have an entire manuscript that has to be submitted all at once, not piece by piece, that you have a publisher's editor look at your work, review it, make suggestions or revisions. And it was kind of interesting because his editor came back when she was done with the project and said, "This has been the easiest book I've ever edited and the most difficult." And I think it was difficult for her and easy for her because I was a journalist to begin with.
Right.
So I knew how to foment a sentence and put the commas where they went. But I wrote from a AP style more than a narrative style that she was probably used to dealing with. In the story does develop character and plot and a sense of pace and going from the beginning to the escalating incidences and the conflicts and the resolutions. But it's written like a sports story. And her final comment when she was done editing the book was, "I felt like I just read a sports story." And I said, "Well, that's great, because that's exactly what it is. It's a sports story." So that was an interesting process.
And then maybe her knowledge of basketball, if she didn't have
she might not have been an expert in basketball. And for the novice who doesn't know anything about the game, you may have to stop at a couple of points in the book and refer to some of the terminology, like the kid really took the ball to the paint and they were banging on the boards and stuff like that. But if you're a sports fan, you can easily acclimate into the vernacular and the language of the book, and it's easy to follow in that respect.
So sometimes knowledge of the subject is something that'll hold you back from, just putting it all together, right? If you're not a basketball fan, you wouldn't know anything about the paint or the 3-point line, or
a good example of that is a good example of that is I have a high school friend from 50 years ago, and we have our reunion coming up this fall. She ordered the book, and her husband played college baseball. He was a very good athlete, okay? And she's sitting there reading the book every morning at the kitchen table, and she's got to stop him like every half a cup of coffee saying, "What does he mean when he said Bruce took the ball to the paint, or they were banging on the boards, or they used a zone plus a triangle and 2 defense?" And so he kind of broke it down for her. And the more she began to understand the vernacular and the language of the story, the more she got to relate to the story, the pace, the characters, and where the story was going.
I must admit, as a woman, I didn't know a lot about it until I moved to DC. And then I became a part of the Georgetown Patrick Ewing.
Got to go with the Hoyas.
Okay? Yeah, right?
Yeah.
Whole thing. And you learn a lot because
Mm-hmm.
that was just a learning experience being there at that time. And in DC at that time when, Georgetown hadn't ever been the Basketball Hall of Fame. That was just
They had
not
a
the
great
place,
run under John
right?
Thompson. Yeah, yeah.
They really did. So, do you have a copy of the cover right there in front of you? Do you have to reach back? Yay, I love it. 3 Point Shy. So, how many renditions? Is that a basketball or a moon? Let me see that.
Pardon me?
You put it back. That's a basketball in the corner. Okay.
Right.
How many renditions of that cover did you do?
It started out, my brother, who is a 30-year veteran of the Brevard County Sheriff's Office, is edging towards retirement, and he's turned himself into a incredible graphic artist. And I think that's what he wants to do in his next life when he retires shortly. He gave me the base idea for the cover of the book with a flying basketball toward the goal, as you can see here, okay?
Yeah, yeah.
And pretty much the font selection. And we sent this to William Lee, and he had his magicians do what they did, and they added the arena lights and the reflection of the lights off the floor and really gave it a dramatic effect.
Yeah.
So we started with the base cover that Vic, my brother, did, added the bells and the whistles that William Lee's folks did, and I was very happy with the final product.
And so it's just one shot, pretty much.
It was pretty much that. It was the base shot, and then the addition of the lights and the arena effects. And it wasn't a long, drawn-out process because I'm not one to take a year and a day to make up my mind whether I like something or not.
Right,
I have being in the newspaper business and laying out pages, I have a pretty good eye for design and color schemes and balance. So I kind of knew what I was looking for. And between Vic and William Lee, they both latched onto it quickly, and they came up with a final product in short order.
And the 3 Point Shot, that kind of, anybody who knows basketball, it focuses right in on that, right?
So well, it ties into the title, and it ties into two pivotal points in the story where this team that I wrote about came up short by 3 points in one major event and came up short by 3 points in another. But it also ties the whole story together about their journey from a season that began in October and went 31 wins and 3 losses in their journey to making it to Lakeland.
So when did you know you were in the midst of a history-making event in Sanford, Florida?
It kind of built slowly. I think everybody knew going into that 1979 basketball season that this was going to be a fairly good team because they had 4 starters back as seniors, and they had Glenn Stambaugh, who's a central character, move in from another school district because he was taking classes at Seminole High where he couldn't get those same classes at his former school. So we knew this was going to be a pretty solid team. What we didn't know was that they would game by game build a scenario where they threatened every high school basketball record in Seminole County.
Wow.
And at one point in the season, they were ranked 3rd in the state, and a team right down the street from you at Daytona Beach, Mainland, was ranked number 2 in the state.
Mainland High.
Extremely rare for 2 teams that played in the same conference to be ranked number 2 and 3 in the state in the middle of a regular season. And they would play 3 times that year. Yes. Once in Sanford, once in Daytona, and again at the district tournament at the end of the year, which was hosted by Daytona. And this was about 10 years before Vince Carter showed up at Daytona Mainland and really put the school on the map. And at that time, the Mainland High School was like a matchbox. Right. At best, it sat maybe 1,000 people. And when they played the game, when Seminole and Mainland played at Mainland, you couldn't have fit a toothpick into that.
Standing room only.
It was absolute zoo, okay? And it's a far cry from Vince Carter donated like $1 million to that high school, and they built an entire sports complex.
It's a campus.
It was not like that in 1979 or 1980. Right. It was small and it was cozy.
What did it do to bring the community together?
It was interesting to see because as the season grew, and as Seminole High School's winning streak grew, and as they rose in the state rankings, okay, all of a sudden there would be signs in storefront windows in the downtown business area, go Seminoles, go Tribe, okay? And then every Tuesday or Thursday or Friday when there's a game day, half the team would be, half the citizens in downtown Sanford would be dressed in orange and black, which were the school colors.
Wow.
It got to the point where the team was the first choice of conversation at the breakfast nooks in town.
Right.
And the last thing about topic of conversations in the watering holes before they closed down with last call. It got to the point where businesses had to open up and sell additional tickets to their game because the school couldn't handle the demand for them.
Nice.
Coach Payne couldn't go to a restaurant. He couldn't take his kids to McDonald's without the proprietors offering him free food, where he had to turn it down and saying, if you don't let me pay, I'm not coming back, because that's not how I do business.
And so the Booster Club went wild.
Booster Club was going crazy. Okay.
Yeah.
So it was like a tidal wave that just built from the day one of the season until we got toward the end of the season, when the story in the book met in a climax.
So what did it do? Like, I read where there were some, some things that went wrong and some things that went right. But what did it do for the senior starters? And I'll say the names for the audience: Bruce McCray, Reggie Butler, David Thomas, Keith Whitney, and Glenn Stambaugh. Now, what was that a pivotal moment for all of them? Did they excel afterwards? Tell me what happened to their lives in the middle of that season.
To put things into perspective, and I'll try to break the players down one by one and just add an anecdote to there. Assistant principal Lamar Richardson, the assistant principal is always in charge of the discipline. Okay.
Absolutely.
He was like father superior to some of these kids, because they weren't angels. Okay. They were high school kids. They did their thing. They got into a little mischief. Okay. But the one thing that I think it did for all five of them was it taught them humility, it taught them grace, and it taught them success. As Lamar Richardson, and teamwork. As Lamar Richardson, the assistant principal, mentions in the latter part of the book, up to this point in their lives, most of these kids had never met with any success. And as their success built and crescendoed toward the end of the season, they handled it with grace, whether they won or they lost. They learned how to get through tough games that were narrowly won by a point or two. They learned how to shake hands after blowing somebody off the court by 50 points. They learned responsibility. They learned teamwork. They learned accountability to each other. David Thomas was the enforcer. He ran the team with an iron fist. People did not want to, his teammates did not want to do wrong or mess up. Okay. Glenn Stambaugh.
Man, did you hear what David said?
Yeah, you better listen to David. Okay. And he was the glue that held that team together. Glenn Stambaugh came in from another high school, so he had to earn the respect of the team. He had to earn his playing time and his playing minutes. And he had one foot in his former high school where all his friends were and his girlfriend was, and a foot in a brand new school trying to be a key part of the team. Okay. Reggie Butler, their big center, was a very quiet, soft-spoken, religious kind of kid. And some days he would play like a monster. And some days it was, is Reggie in the lineup tonight? Okay.
Is he here?
Yeah, is he here? Okay. Bruce McCray was the stud. He was the leading scorer and one of the best rebounders on the team.
Yeah.
Okay. And it was just interesting to see them collectively come together. And I think the one thing it did, both on and off the court, was at the end of the season, all five of these kids and a couple of the reserves on the bench were offered scholarship to continue playing and their education at either the junior college level or the four-year school level. So it opened doors for them academically and athletically and gave them a next step on where they were going in their journey.
You didn't mention Keith Whitney.
Keith was the point guard.
Okay.
He pulled the trigger. He was a 5'10" gizmo that had speed to burn, and he had a pretty good shot. Okay. And
I understand he was the one who could see the whole court.
He could. That's why he was the point guard.
I mean, he was just that guy, right?
Keith was the point guard, and he was the point guard from the sophomore year on. So he ran the show. He distributed the ball. He was the guy on the court that kept the tempo and the pace and got the other players involved. He was a great assist man. He was a great passer, and he had a pretty good shot.
think I read that somebody said he was a Muggsy Bogues. I don't remember
He
Muggsy.
was a little bit bigger than Muggsy was like 5'4", 5'5".
Okay, yeah.
Keith was 5'10", maybe 165. He was a
Mm-hmm.
solid point guard. He wasn't
Mm-hmm.
huge, but he
Mm-hmm.
was fat and he was left-handed.
Oh
And
my, I didn't read
if
that.
you're not used to playing against a left-handed basketball
Right.
player, it's like,
That
trying
throws
to
you
be
off a
it
little
does, especially when you're trying to play defense. Is he going left? Is he going right? Okay. And he was a good penetrator. He could penetrate, he could dish off, and he could shoot from 10 to 15 feet.
So Bruce, Reggie, David, and Keith were all locals.
They were all local. These kids went to kindergarten together. I think
Together. Okay.
They grew up since they were in grade school. They played basketball together for years, just like the Daytona Mainland team did, because
Right.
the team that they
Exactly.
played, those kids waltzed through the Daytona Beach Y program since the time they were big enough to hold a basketball.
Powell,
Yep.
through Y, through, yeah.
And they'd been together as long as the Sanford kids had been together. So it was an interesting class of teams that, started out as third graders that made it all the way to seniors in high school, basically as a nucleus.
So Glenn was the walk on and really had to find his way in the group.
He did.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
he was a deadly shooter. This guy could knock him down from 25 feet
Mm.
out. And I think he finished
Mm.
the year shooting 90% free throws from the free throw line. At one time, they had a fundraising charity at his former high school where he made 99 out of 100 free throws to raise money. That's how good he was. And he had ice water for veins.
Wow.
If in the book, there's several chapters and several games where he goes to the free throw line with 2 and 3 seconds on the clock
And
and
gets
wins the
it.
game.
Yeah. Yeah. There was a guy, a basketball player named Iceman, right? I don't remember who his name.
George Gervin.
George Garvin. Yeah,
George
the
Gervin.
Iceman. That's right. Yes, I love basketball, man. I guess you can
It
tell.
shows. It
Yeah,
shows.
I kind of know. And so tell us about Coach Payne. Like, you got to be a different kind of person to deal with all those personalities. Plus, you got the mainstay, and you got the ones on the bench. Then you got parents. Then you got boosters. Then you got the
Principles.
school principals. Then you got community, like you said, go to McDonald's and they're throwing food at him. Tell me what kind of a person he was.
Let me break him down into
Is
three
he still
parts.
alive? I think he's
Oh
still alive.
yes, oh
Yeah.
yes. Okay. And one of the wonderful
So
things about
not
yes,
was. Mm-hmm.
one of the wonderful things about writing this book was I was able to reconnect with Coach Payne, who is now retired in Boone, North Carolina. And I hadn't seen him or talked to him in 40 years. I
Mm.
called him up in August of last year when I started to write the book, and I got his phone number from a friend in Sanford. Okay. And I said, Coach Payne, this is a blast from your past. This is Joe DeSantis, former sports editor of the Sanford Herald. And there was a long pause on the end of the phone. And finally, I said, Coach, are you there? And he said, I had some pretty good seasons with you as sports editor. Okay. So we reconnected. First, let me tell you, he was a basketball scholar. He knew the game inside and out. He was a high school basketball player himself. He played in college. At one point, he was the third leading scorer in the junior college ranks on his way to a 4-year degree. So he knew basketball. He knew the game. He knew offense. He knew defense. Number two, he was a great motivator where he could push the right buttons with the right personalities, with the different kids and their different temperaments. He could get them to understand that it was a team game and that you have to sit this one out, or you've got to play, or we need you to step up here, or we need you to score more, we need you to do this. He was a terrific motivator, but most of all, he loved these kids.
Absolutely. You got to.
He loved these kids and they loved him, and this team would have walked through a brick wall for Coach Payne. He treated my sports staff at the Seminole Herald like we were from Sports Illustrated, not some young small newspaper. I was 24 years old at the time I got this job. He went out of his way to accommodate us, to make himself accessible, to open up his locker room, to share his players. And he really contributed not only to the success of the basketball team, but to the success of our coverage of his team that year as the story built and the book was put together. And we spent maybe 8 Sunday afternoons starting last August, going back through each chapter and each section of the season, refurbishing and brushing up our memories of, well, okay, in this particular game, you did this, and can you touch upon that? And we kind of filled the bottom in, if you will, to borrow from a Harry Chapin song,
Right.
where we dusted off the memory of 40 years gone by,
Right.
so that I could get the book as factually accurate as possible. And he was a great help in helping me put the final manuscript together.
Now, I read somewhere that there was some controversy, and we can slip past this question if you like, about a couple of the players. Did that controversy come from notoriety, and just being at another level in basketball, or what was that all about?
There was no real controversy involving the players. There was a situation that transpired very late in the season that I feel had a dramatic and a direct impact on whether they won the state championship or not. I don't want to give the entirety of the book away.
Right, exactly,
okay?
exactly. Just give us the cliff notes.
I mentioned their arch rival with Daytona Beach Mainland.
Yeah.
They played each other 3 times. The first time was at Seminole High. Mainland came in and beat them by 3 points.
Yeah.
That ties into the title of the book, 3-Point Shot.
Yeah.
Late in the season, when they played the away game at Mainland, Mainland ran them off the court.
Yeah.
Seminole didn't show up that night. Mainland beat them by 21 or 22 points. If the district tournament went according to rankings and seedings, Seminole High and Mainland would again meet in the championship game, in which they did. Obviously, one team advanced to Lakeland, and that was Seminole High. And in that third game, Sanford, Seminole High got the 800-pound gorilla off their back by defeating Mainland by, I believe, 1 point. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And this guy Stambaugh, who could shoot foul shots. Again,
Right.
I don't want to give the book away. Okay.
Right.
But in leading up to the sectional and regional games that led them to the Final Four in Lakeland, the last practice before the team went to Lakeland for the semifinal game, David Thomas, their leading rebounder, best defender, and the glue that held the team together,
Right.
and Keith Whitney, the point guard, were horsing around in the gym before practice even started. They got into a mock slap fight. David twisted his leg.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't practice that afternoon. Nobody really thought, oh, he just got a slight sprain, he'll be fine. The next morning, his leg was swollen up like a watermelon. He couldn't play that Saturday night. Compounding that, the other part of the controversy was Bruce McCray, the leading scorer, had from time to time had an asthma problem and used one of those pocket inhalers.
Mm-hmm.
So David's out. They get to Lakeland. Bruce comes down with bronchitis, and he left his inhaler back in Sanford. They had to give this young man oxygen at halftime of the semifinal game just to carry his body back there out on the court.
Yeah.
So that was really the only thing that was any kind of controversy. And I swear to God, not a case of what might have been, what could have been, what should have been. But I'm pretty sure, I'm pretty confident that had David Thomas and Bruce McCray not ran into the situations that they
been
did
at that level that they normally were. Yeah.
That the outcome of the state championship that year might have been a little bit different.
Yeah. Yeah, that's that. Yeah, what I've read, I actually didn't know anything about the story until I did some research on the book, and I was fascinated about the whole, because Sanford has gotten such a bad community name over.
It's gone through its challenges. Yeah.
Yeah, right. So it's nice to put a spotlight on something that was so grand for that community and what they did and how they brought these young men to a pivotal point in their lives that a lot of basketball players never get to, right? This is what you work for and you never get there. So
sure.
It was really nice to read a story about these young men. So tell me, have you kept in touch with any of them?
I didn't initially, because a year after the season took place, I left the newspaper to move back to my hometown of Erie, Pennsylvania. I had an opportunity to go work.
You went to Erie, Pennsylvania?
That's where I was born. Okay.
Oh, God bless you.
But you know why I left? Because all the snow.
Got property there I haven't seen in like.
Do you?
Years.
No kidding. Okay.
I was born in Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh.
Okay. I almost went to Pittsburgh for a PhD, but I went back to work because after graduate school and getting my master's degree, I was broke and I needed a paycheck.
Understood.
But I went back to Erie because the St. Louis Cardinals had a minor league franchise in Erie that year, and they were looking for a public relations director and a radio play-by-play announcer. And I saw a great opportunity to go back, be back around my family again. So I left. The sports editor position was turned over to Sam Cooke, who wrote the foreword for my book, and we've been friends for years. And Sam kind of put me back in touch with some of the players once we started working on the book, because I would write a chapter and I send it to Sam. I said, Sam, is this how you remember the things? Because
Right.
we
You
shared
don't want to tell any tales,
we shared
right?
every day of that
Exactly.
season together. So I did reconnect with Glenn Stambaugh. I reconnected with Mike Godreau, who also plays an interesting story, a role in the book. And about 2 months ago, the weekend of May 23rd, we had a book signing in downtown Sanford at the Sanford Executive and Cigar Shop.
Yeah, I know where that
And
is.
like 11 of the 15 players from that year's team made it back from all over the country. Coach Payne and his wife Barbara came down from Boone, North Carolina. The assistant coach Tom Smith was there. Principal Don Reynolds was there. Assistant principal Lamar Richardson was there. We had people from the Sanford City Council there, people from the business community. And there was like a lot of love in that room for 4 hours that Saturday afternoon. And to see these guys reconnect, Stambaugh brought a 3-ring binder that was 20 inches high with every single story from every game that year, and people just were reminiscing, and we were telling old stories, a few lies, of course, when people get together after 40 years. But it was beautiful
The fish
to
gets
see
bigger.
to see the team reconnect and the love that they still had for each other and for the coach and for the town. It was really something.
Did you have them all sign one book?
I did.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I wore my hand out. I had a black and blue hand from signing. We sold some books that afternoon too, I'm happy to say.
Nice, nice. So what lessons do you think the community and the region learned from this experience from 1979 to 1980?
As far as lessons learned, at this time in 79 and 80, Seminole County was a relatively small county. It was growing. It stood in the shadow of Orlando, Big Orange County. And back then, when it came to high school basketball in the 70s and in late 60s, the road to the state championship in Lakeland went through Orlando's Metro Conference. You had teams like Boone, Edgewater, Winter Park, Oak Ridge. They were perennially in the state playoffs. Payne and his team beat the Metro teams 6 times that year. They didn't lose a single game to them. And that's one of the reasons they were so good, was because they played the toughest competition they could find. What I think it did for the town and the community was it gave them a sense of, we're no longer the little redheaded stepchilds on the block. We're growing up. And Seminole County, population-wise, was expanding and exploding at that time.
And so it gave the city a little boost economically.
It gave a little swag, you know, they put a little pep in their step, okay, and it really did. Exactly. And since that time, as Payne points out in the book, that really was the beginning of a launch period for not only Seminole High, but a lot of the teams in Seminole County to really put on their big boy and big girl pants and start growing up and making some noise when it came to high school athletics.
Exactly. And knowing that you had the talent there, but you just were not taken advantage of, right? Because sometimes I think you kowtow to the bigger guys, right?
We can't do it. We've never done it before.
Yeah, we've never done it before. It can't be done, right? And so, I read somewhere that economically, anytime there was a game, right, and you had to go to Orlando, you had to go to Maine, right? They seemed like the halfway point was kind of in Sanford. And so it did help economically in the community. So
a good example of that economic impact, the first time that Mainland came over and played Seminole High, they had to distribute and sell tickets at 4 banks in downtown Sanford because the demand was so high. The parking lot was full at 4 o'clock that afternoon. I think Lamar Richardson was out there scalping tickets, to tell you the truth. I had never seen ticket scalping at a high school basketball game, maybe for the state championship, but this was a regular season game, like 12 or 15 games into the season. It was incredible. The businesses were full, the restaurants were full, everybody was in town for that game, okay? And everybody's, you know, ching, 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 ching. The town did well. The bookstore was sold out of memorabilia and jerseys and uniforms, okay? So it had a direct impact economically as well.
So I'm sorry I didn't get a chance to read the whole book, but I will. I'm going to order it because I did a lot of research on it. But reading the book is not research, right? Research is research. Reading the book is a whole different story. So is there anything else you'd like to share with us this evening before we come to an end?
2 things.
Okay.
Number one, I'm glad I wrote the book.
Oh, yeah.
I told myself I was going to write it for a long, long time, and finally I did sit down to write it. And there have been 4 things that have come out of publishing the book that I never saw coming before.
Okay.
Number 1, the book is now in 4 public libraries in the United States.
Yeah.
4 public libraries and 4 school libraries. And to get a book into a high school library with all the controversy that's about publishing these days,
kidding me?
is no
That
small
is
feat. Okay. The book had to be reviewed.
Yeah.
The book had to be reviewed by media specialists. It had to be approved by the school district, and then it had to be cataloged and rotated in their system. As we speak today, that I didn't see this coming when I published the book. The book is now in the formal library of Seminole High, where the story took place.
Wow.
The book is now in the library at Eastern Florida State College, where I continue to teach communication courses. The book is now in the library at Lewisburg High School, where for 7 years I taught English and journalism at the high school level. And finally, the book has been approved, adopted, and will be added to the Kellam High School Library, where I earned my first byline as a high school journalist. And I'll be presenting a formal copy of the book to the school in October when I go up for my 50th anniversary to Virginia Beach. I never saw any of this coming when I sat down and started typing.
So tell me, is there a book 2 that's entitled When the Ball Hit the Rim?
If there's a book 2, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if it will be a sports story. I have a book in mind, but I need the cooperation of my classmates from Kellam High School from the class of 1973. We regather this October for a 3-day weekend. I have a book in mind called Classmates. And what I would like to do, but I would need their cooperation, is, when we're in high school, when we're 17, 18 years old, we have the world figured out. We have plans, we have hopes, we have dreams, we have goals.
We're going to do this, we're going to do that. Yeah.
I would like to fast forward 50 years and take maybe a dozen high school classmates and track how their lives turned out, because I think it would make for a fascinating story. But I don't know if they want to allow me the privilege of stepping into their lives and tapping into them on an intimate level that shares whether they got the job they wanted, they married a pretty girl that they chased in high school, they had the kind of family they did. Because, life isn't a bowl of roses for everybody. And Lord knows, when I was in high school, I wanted to be a veterinarian, but I ran into biology and chemistry, and I wasn't smart enough to do it. So I became a journalist, okay? But I think it would be fascinating to track people to see how things turned out from high school to 50 years later. I don't know if I'm going to bring my reporter's notebook, and I'm going to start asking questions, and either they're going to answer them or I'm going to get punched out, one or the other.
Or you can ask them all to read to write a chapter. It could be an anthology.
Could be.
Right. Janice Kearney is the anthology queen.
There you go.
And so people are really, they might not want you to write the story, but they might want to write the story. Right. So
absolutely,
you give them the option, right? You'll end up rewriting it, trust me, but at least they will have the option to tell their story their way, as opposed to, you recording it or whatever, and then putting your spin on it, right? So people like to write their own story. So I think it's going to work out for you either way. Some of them will say, yeah, I want you to write it. And then some will say, well, can I write my own story and see what happens? I think it'll all come together for you.
I think one of your final questions was, what did I learn from this experience, or what would I share? What is a pearl of wisdom to share?
Yes, I asked all our guests for a pearl of wisdom. You can give us
pearl of wisdom would be, mine would be simple, okay? Because I've talked to a lot of friends, even some family members say, someday I want to sit down and write a book. Don't do what I did. Don't wait 40 years for it to go by, because nobody is guaranteed tomorrow. And my pearl of wisdom is, you can't finish writing a book unless you start writing a book. So if it's in your heart, if it's in your dreams, if it's on your bucket list, duct tape yourself to the keyboard and get it done.
Okay, you can't finish writing a book
until you start writing.
Until you start writing. Thank you for that. Because we have so many people who I'm looking at our friend Tam, who just need to get started, because once you get started, it is just easier, right? It's easy. No, it's not easy, but
it's a journey, but you can't start a journey without taking the first step.
Exactly. So thank you, Joe DeSantis. Thank you to the Monday Night Tribe. I certainly appreciate each and every one of you.
Thanks for having me on.
Thank you. We will we put this up on YouTube, so you'll have it to put it on your social media within the next hour. And thank you again for being here. And when the lights go out and the cell phone towers go down, all you have left is a flashlight and a good book. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Thank you, Joe.
Bye-bye.
We'll see you again. Bye-bye. Good night, everybody.
Good night, Donna. Great to learn your experience with Georgetown.
Oh my goodness, that's a glass of wine.
So hey, that's a whole bottle of wine.
Yeah, that's a whole bottle of wine. I had floor seats. It was amazing.
Yes. Joe, thanks for being here.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Bye-bye, everybody.